is the heart of our indigenous identity. So his history is place-based. His spirituality is place-based. His economic practices are place-based. And his reparative action is place-based. You are on Indian land. And so we welcome you as our relatives. We've already prayed to our ancestors today to let them know who we are, why we're here, what we're doing today, and that we will do good things here together. So this place, our home that we call Turtle Island, is a big place. And recognizing the deep truths is a large responsibility. But as you're going to be able to tell, my nephew is pretty capable of handling large ideas, reflecting even larger dreams for a world in which all people can truly see themselves squarely, as we heard this morning. So I welcome my nephew, Jim Vera.
Good afternoon, everyone. Aho, Kunamante, Makwa, Dinaway, Vegas, Nipak, the Nonamau, Inkanu, Sandoa, give you greetings and introduce myself as Bear, Bear Jacob. I am from the Turtle Clan, and I'm a citizen of the Sacred Nation, and with greatness and gratitude in my heart, I extend my deepest thank you to everyone who has gathered. A couple of protocols before I begin my talk this afternoon. I want to again, first and foremost, acknowledge that we are gathered on the ancestral homeland of the Dakota people. We are just 2.5 miles from the sacred Dakota, which is the center of the Dakota universe. It is literally the place of the Dakota creation. It is 500 where we are right now. We are gathered today in proximity to the territories of Anishinaabe, Indigenous people, and myriad of other indigenous people who have at one time or another called this place what we know as Minnesota, or a portion thereof have called it home. We know that the story of colonization, white supremacy, has affected the lives and stories of indigenous people across this nation. And as I advocate that a land acknowledgement is simply empty words unless we commit to actually heal, to repair, I personally, in front of all of you, commit and have committed to ensuring that for as long as I set foot in Minnesota, the Dakota story will be made known from my mouth and will be prioritized. As such, again, this is all part of protocols. I want to extend a special gratitude and acknowledgement to my auntie Elona, who you just heard. She has been a vanguard for me to follow in my work and has supported my work for a number of years. Thank you very much. I also want to acknowledge, I'm very honored to have into the room, and in the room, Dakota elder, Mr. Sheldon Wolfchild, whose storied career in not only entertainment but activism really is an example for all of us. And as Mr. Wolfchild is Dakota, and we are on Dakota land, I would like to ask special permission to address the people who are gathered here today. These protocols may seem foreign to you, but I assure you they are not. I want to give my talk and address some things. I come from a Christian background. I spent most of my childhood Sunday afternoons sitting in a church pew somewhere, and so that style of preaching and speaking and addressing people has no doubt influenced and affected the way I speak and address people. So no good sermon is complete without a title. So if you're looking for a title for my talk today, it is Telling Complete Stories to Accomplish Complete Healing. I began my work for Native justice and advocacy probably a little over 15 years ago now. And I remember distinctly one time after addressing a group of people, a woman approached me. Her name was Valerie. And I had heard of Valerie, but I did not know Valerie. I had heard of Valerie as really a tremendous worker in the Black Civil Rights Movement here in Minnesota during the 60s, as part of the historic and phenomenal Sounds of Blackness, which is right here in Minnesota, and she won Grammys for her singing with Sounds of Blackness. So in addition to all of that, at the time that I was meeting Valerie on this stage, she was one of the area's top cancer researchers in the Twin Cities. Incredible woman. And after my talk, she pulled me aside. She said, "Jim Bear, I want to tell you a story." And just like whenever an elder wants to tell you a story, you close your mouth and you listen. Valerie pulled me aside and she said, "You know, Jim Bear, as a black woman growing up in the Twin Cities, I came of age during the 60s as the Civil Rights Movement was really coming into its full flower here in the Twin Cities." And she said, "I remember that when we as black people here in the Twin Cities, and when we were organizing, when we were gathering in church basements, always, at every one of those meetings, always along the back, sitting or standing in solidarity, was a line of Native American people, just standing there, showing their solidarity. And they were there every week. And they would mobilize with us, and they would activate with us. It was at this point in her story when Valerie's eyes began to well up with tears. She said, "Jim Bear, a few years after those meetings, when the Native people in the Twin Cities were starting to mobilize and activate," she said, I didn't attend those meetings. I didn't stand in the back in solidarity. And I don't know if any of my fellow activists did. With tears now fully running down her face, she said, "Jim Bear, let's not make that mistake again." I am here to tell you today why I, as an American Indian, even while I call out for American Indian reparations, I also call out for Black reparations. And I am here to invite you, as you call out for Black reparations, to stand in solidarity for American Indian reparations. Knowing full well that the path towards our tied-up liberation does not look the same. What may repair in Black communities may not repair in American Indian communities. Knowing full well that what reparations looks like for American Indian people may not necessarily apply in African American communities, but yet still, if we do away with the mindset of scarcity and we adopt a communal mindset of abundance, we know that we don't have to buy in to the false narrative that there's only so much to go around. As was said in my bio, I am the co-director for racial justice for the Minnesota Council of Churches. The Minnesota Council of Churches is a membership organization made up of over 26 different denominations, Christian denominations from around the state of Minnesota. All told, we represent more than 1 million people across the state of Minnesota who are part of the Christian faith community. We are 75 years old, and our racial justice program is just about 5 years old. I remember distinctly standing on the corner of 38th and Chicago on May 26th in the morning, just hours after George Floyd was murdered. And I remember after just spending some time in that space, feeling shocked, numb, feeling, I don't know, the nameless emotions that sometimes the human spirit doesn't have the vocabulary to speak out. Went back to the office and was asked the question by our CEO, how do you think we should respond? What do you think we should do? And out of those conversations was born our racial justice program. Our racial justice program focuses simultaneously on 2 impact communities: American Indians in Minnesota and African Americans in Minnesota. And we build this program around a 3-locus model around truth-telling, education, and ultimately reparations. Now we focus on 2 communities at the same time because, again, we're dealing with faith communities, and faith communities like to use words like transgressions or sin. And when we are talking about sin of racism, we know that it first and foremost impacts American Indian people and Black people in this country. We focus on these 2 communities because of all of the racial minorities that are now part of our culture and society. It is these 2 communities for whom entrance into a white supremacist system was not a choice. On any other level, with any other racial minority who have made their homes in this country, at some level, there was a choice to move into this system. And so if we are going to use the churchy language like original sin, the original sin of racism is felt in the bodies of the indigenous people and the descendants of the people who were brought here enslaved to work the land. Now here in Minnesota, we have a long history of social justice and civil rights in the state of Minnesota, a history in which we should be proud of. But much of this work, I will submit to you, has been siloed. And in our silos, we hear and thus tell incomplete stories. You see, within the silo of American Indian activism, we have long heard that this country was built on the genocide of indigenous people and on the theft of land. And that is a true story. That is a true story. And within black activist circles, we have long heard that this nation was built on the backs of slave labor. That is a true story. But see, as long as our communities are siloed, those true stories are not complete. You see, it is only when we acknowledge the fullness of the narrative of how this nation came to be that we tell a true story that is also complete. This nation was founded on the genocide of indigenous people, on the theft of indigenous land that was worked by enslaved bodies. That is the true story and the complete story of how this nation was founded. And for decades, as these siloed racial justice communities have done their work with Native people activating for Native causes and African American people activating for African American causes, great accomplishments have been achieved. I acknowledge that. Great accomplishments have been achieved. But what has happened because of that existence in silos is we have robbed ourselves of the strength of solidarity. We have robbed ourselves of the strength of solidarity. We have bought into the false narrative that if I, as an American Indian person, have to compete with my African American brothers and sisters for the resources and attention, puts me at odds with my brother and sister. And likewise, if African American people in this mindset of scarcity have to compete with Native people for the limited resources and attention, that can lead to animosity, and believe me, it has. In the work of telling complete stories, I have had to undo some of those false narratives, both within the African American community as assumptions are made of American Indian people, and also do that same work in the American Indian community over ignorances and assumptions made of African American communities. See, as long as we are kept in silos, then we, as powerful voices and communities, are simply wrestling each other for the crumbs that fall from the table. We have lost sight of the fact that it was your hands who made the bread that is being eaten at the table. It was my soil made the damn table that the bread is being eaten at. Why are we wrestling for crumbs? I am no longer content to wrestle for crumbs. I am no longer content to, as I am somewhat ashamed to say, when I first talked of my work, my own uncle said to me, why should black people get their reparations? They should get it lying behind us. And he said, Uncle, it's that kind of mentality that not only has worked to keep black people down, but keeps us down too. I'm no longer content to listen to incomplete stories. And I'm no longer content to wrestle for facts. Because I know the beauty, magic, and power that comes when we stand together. I recall with distinct memory in 2015 when, not too far from here in North Minneapolis, Jamar Clark, an unarmed black man, was gunned down at the hands of Minneapolis police. And I remember the activism that followed that as hundreds, if not thousands of people took over the 4th Precinct and occupied that 4th Precinct. And I submit to you, and I fully acknowledge that that occupation of the 4th Precinct was uniquely a black space. It was a place where black voices were crying out for liberation. It was uniquely a black space. I submit to you that. But I also remember every night that I would go down to the 4th Precinct. My nostrils were filled with the scent of indigenous sacred medicine. It was being burned as prayers were offered for our collective communities. My ears distinctly heard the heartbeat of Mother Earth as it was banged out on a drum, as songs were being offered. That even in this uniquely black space, indigenous people showed up, offered their bodies, offered their prayers. It was as if there was a line of indigenous people standing in the back of the room in solidarity. The next year, in 2016, I was just a few hundred miles from here and near the Cannonball River reservation. As literally tens of thousands of indigenous people had gathered to say no to laissez-faire capitalism that would harm their waterways. As in, this was, in my entire life, this was the largest crowd of indigenous people I had ever seen in one place. And I seem to remember silently asking myself, I wonder if the African American community would show up. I remember one beautiful sunny afternoon as I was watching a live stream from the comfort of my own living room. I am wiping tears away from my eyes as no less than 5 chapters of Black Lives Matter marched in under the We know the power, the beauty, the magic of solidarity. We know that the first peoples of this land, the descendants of the enslaved people who were forcibly brought to this land, are historically linked. And that historic connection cannot, as long as it will not be undone. And so this is my call whenever I'm invited into faith communities. Do not tell yourself incomplete stories. Hold on to the true story, the complete story. Because I'm tired of playing professional Olympics about who had it worse. I'm tired of comparative trauma. Because the reality is we can't do that. As long as we continue to wrestle over crumbs, the only winner in this is the colonizer. And even though it is true that historically the way American people were treated is very, very different, even though historically that is true, it all serves the same purpose. Because you see, one of the largest traumas to ever impact the American Indian community is the residential boarding school system. My own grandmother is a survivor of boarding school. And at the same time, this is a period of time in our history where it was legally required, it was mandated to have your children taken away from you and educated in white schools. Those parents who resisted were arrested, jailed, or worse. While it was required for American Indian people to be educated in a white educational system, just a generation prior to that, it was against the law to educate black people in this country. So here is one nation treating two different people groups entirely differently. Why? You see, at the same time that the blood quantum system is being engineered within American Indian peoples, this is a system by which every American Indian out here has their blood quantum, in other words, their level of nativeness, registered with the United States government. I have a card in my pocket right now that testifies to how much Indian I am. At the same time, the U.S. government is keeping track of how much Indian we are. And the goal is to eventually wash out American Indian blood. At the same time that is happening, the governments, state and local governments of this nation are creating one-drop rules for our black communities. Which means that historically we have had people who looked white but were considered black legally because they had a black ancestor. And see, the goal of the blood quantum system with American Indians is to eventually make them all white. To infuse their blood so much with white blood that eventually they're not Indian anymore. And the goal with the one-drop rule is to ensure that you're always black. You are always a subcategory. So even if your skin is light enough and your hair is straight enough, you'll still be black. system, one government, treating two communities entirely different. For the American Indian, this was an invitation into whiteness. This, not an invitation, this was a requirement into whiteness. For Black communities, this was a forever expulsion from whiteness. Not in two communities, same government, same time, treated very differently. Wow. So if we play the question with this, if we wrestle over the breadcrumbs, then we do this thing where we're like, what's worse? Who had it worse? Whose ancestors suffered more? But what we fail to realize is that even though these communities treated very differently at the same time, it serves the same master. It serves white supremacy. You see, for American Indian people, our value to white supremacy has always been our land. Always been our land. And so if you can require American Indians into whiteness, thus relinquishing their sovereignty, thus relinquishing their sovereign claim, even their constitutional claim to land, thus relinquishing that, you have the land. At the same time, for our African American communities, their value to white supremacy was not land, but it was bodies. Thus, if you can keep Black people constantly Black, not white, subhuman, you need feel no guilt or shame over how you exploit and abuse and mistreat their bodies. Two communities treated very differently at the same time by the same government. All it does is serve white supremacy. So I am here as a Native American to, while I am with full heart and full voice calling out for American Indian reparations, I am here to also stand in solidarity, arm in arm, and call for Black reparations. We need not wrestle over promise. We need not buy into and accept stories that, though true, are incomplete. Because if we move forward with an incomplete story, we will only ever achieve an incomplete healing.
Wow, that was really powerful. Please give him another round of applause.